saved.
Yeah.
Full view.
All right. Hey, good morning, everyone. Colonel Brian Hildebrand here. Matt, you got some introductory comments for us?
Yes, sir, I do.
I don't think we can. You're coming in muted.
Can you hear me now, sir?
We got you, buddy.
Okay,
Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, so welcome to session 6, Writing for the Profession of Arms. And we are very pleased to have a guest speaker today, Dr. Amos Fox. So Dr. Fox is a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and a professor of practice at Arizona State University's School of Politics and Global Studies, where he's affiliated with the Future Security Initiative. He earned his PhD in International Relations from the University of focusing his research on proxy wars and international armed conflict. Dr. Fox has authored numerous publications, including Conflict Realism, Understanding the Casual Logic of Modern War and Warfare. Additionally, he hosts the Revolution and Military Affairs podcast and serves as a contributing editor at The War on the Rocks. Sir, over to you.
All right. Hey, we're sharing a camera here, so it almost looks like Dr. Fox and I are riding together in a Yugo for all you 80s fans. So I know you guys know that stuff. Hey, Writing Roundtable, we're missing, of course, our band director today. Chief Lights is out, but we have Dr. Amos Fox here, so it's amazing. So, Dr. Fox, thank you for being here. Appreciate your time. Today's session 6, what we're going to look at is, so we have this thing called Operation Warp Drive, and I kind of gave you a little bit about that when you got here. But in reality, what we're asking the soldiers of the 36th Infantry Division to do is help us develop the profession, participate in shaping what doctrine looks like in the future, and looking at your body of work, and looking at your skill set, your experiences, where your interests lie. I mean, you just seem like a perfect candidate to come here and kind of share some experiences of like, how do we help these guys get some of the writing, right? How do we get them to like compete in competitions? And so that's what we're going to cover today. So right off the bat, I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to say, so you wrote a book, Conflict Realism, right? This just came out, what?
August.
Yeah. Very good. So how difficult, like when you're approaching a problem set and you're like, hey, I got to get something down, like how difficult is it for you to kind of get this writing process going? Do you find something you have to jumpstart? Like maybe you go to our Starbucks and, down like 5 shots of espresso or something. You're like, I'm on it now. Yeah.
Yeah. So first, Colonel Hildebrand, thanks. Thanks so much for asking me to come talk with you and your team, and thanks to your team for helping coordinate everything. So for me, I have I have to give context and backstory before I answer the question. So
Yeah.
I used to coach football before I came in the Army, and so my mind is still oriented along the lines of a football coach, where if something's not working, you have to figure out why, because if you don't figure out why, you're going to lose. And it doesn't matter how much you want to do something a certain way. If that way isn't working, you need to like say, hey, why isn't this, to tie it to football, why isn't this play working?
Sure.
What is different than what I expected, and what do I need to do to accommodate that into what I'm doing so that what I'm doing works? And so when I came into the Army, that mindset came with me. Probably to the chagrin of people I've worked for over the years, where I'll be like, hey, this isn't working. Let's, we need to figure this out.
Yeah.
And so that to me, that's just part of who I am as a person. And so for me, a lot of it is just a basic inquisitiveness about the world.
Yeah.
And so when I see something that doesn't work, I always think to myself, what's the problem? What's the hang up? What are we doing that is causing it not to work? What are other people doing that's causing it? How's the environment affecting that? And so that's the place that I start. And then a lot of it too is just pardon my language, but getting pissed off about being in situations where things aren't working, And so a lot of my frustration with things grew out of my own deployments to Iraq as a lieutenant in the Army. And as a baby captain, where I was like, what the hell is going on? This, especially my first deployment in Iraq, 2005, 2006, it was, arguably the worst time of that war. And the strategy just seemed to be, let's drive around and get blown up, And so
Yeah.
that also burrowed deep into my consciousness about like we've got to think deeply about the problems and not just accept the answers that are coming. So those things really contribute to, even now today when I write about stuff, I'll look at a problem, precision strike, for instance, and I'll hear what people are saying, but then you see the results don't match the things that are being said about it.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, this is something that it really just starts irritating me,
Yeah.
And then because it irritates me so much, I find the impetus to write. And so for me, I always take notes. Like if you look at my notebook here, this isn't even my normal notebook, but I've
Yeah.
labeled things that I need to come back to. I was at a conference in DC a couple weeks ago, and I was taking notes on something completely different while the person was talking, and I was thinking about something,
Yeah.
And so that kind of thing. I have a series of notebooks over the years where I just keep running thoughts of ideas. I mark them later, and then I'll go back to them when it's time to write it. And I usually end up, for me, I'll scan my notes, and then I'll have them on my computer, and then I go through them that way when I start working on a project.
Yeah. And it's interesting. It's like, so a lot of these guys work with me within the organization on OS. And so probably that technique you talked about, like where someone's talking and they're doing something else. Like I experience that a lot with these guys. Like Mariah, I'm sure she can comment like on some of her strategies that like I'll be talking and she'd be like totally ignoring what I'm saying and just taking her notes. Mariah, have you ever done something like that?
Me, never. Especially with you, sir. You're so interesting all the time.
Yeah. So, and I know Jared, you're working on something. So Jared he's kind of like our resident R&D guy,
Okay.
research. He's really big into artificial intelligence. And so he's actually working on something for Substack right now where he's trying to put together like how to effectively use AI as a research tool. And so looking at your methodology, these are some things that I think people like Jared, people like Mariah, myself, people out there wanting to write for the 36th Infantry Division,
Yeah.
they can figure out like, hey, that's a methodology that works for Dr. Fox. Maybe it's a methodology that works for you, Jared.
I think I do that a lot. People are talking, and I'm like, I'm over here chat GPT away working on something completely different. And I'm like, maybe I should have been paying attention to that. Oh, that's
Yeah.
all right. Hold on. Let me get, I'll catch up. Don't worry. I'll use AI and I'll catch up based off of a little
Yeah.
bit of it and then go back and refine later.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's really got down pat. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he owns like a pair of glasses or something that like records things and then it's like running chat GPT in the background while he's actually doing work. So he's really interested in those things. So, and that's what this session's about, right?
Yeah.
Like techniques, like so you mentioned you talked about some proxy wars, you talked about your books about conflict realism. Some of the stuff I read in your body of work, it's juxtaposing maybe attrition versus precision. Like, how did you find yourself? You kind of mentioned like your process of like what kind of pushes you to write, but
Yeah.
like this subject matter, like the intersection of proxy war and
Division. I did and so we deployed right after I got to 1st Armored Division to Iraq. We took over as the the core element of Flick OIR. And while I was sitting there one day, the deputy J33 comes in and we're chatting in the J5 shop. And he says something to the effect of, man, this proxy war we're fighting is wild. And I was like, what? And I hadn't really thought about like it being a proxy war necessarily. And so then I started, looking up proxy war stuff in my spare time as a planner, because there's tons of that with planners. But I started digging into that and trying to understand that and looking at principal agent theory and figuring that out in network theory and theories of power. And all of that really, I hadn't quite been exposed to prior to that conversation because I hadn't had that spark in my mind. What the hell is he talking about? And so that drove my interest in that subject in particular. And then that I ended up the first military review article that I had, not first article with military review, but the first deploy, whichever way you say it.
Yeah.
Honorable mention, still bummed about that. that I got
Yeah.
was in that 2018 writing competition. When I got home, I had submitted this article that I was working on while I was there, trying to make sense of it, because a lot of it is me just trying to understand it. And I'm like, I'm going to write this thing
Yeah.
as a way of helping me understand what's going on. And so the proxy war stuff grew out of that one mention on the whiteboard in the J5 in Baghdad. And then it's grown. It ended up being like my PhD's,
Wow.
my PhD's focused on. So that in particular was how that got going,
Yeah.
and what spurred all the research that I've done on that. So.
That's cool. So, and I'm sure many of our viewers would find this very interesting, Amos, is like, did you just stumble into the writing contest? Like the editor said, you know what, this is pretty good. Or did you have the goal of like, hey, you know what, I need some cold hard cash, like give me that $1,000 for
Yeah.
one Dupuy. So, I mean, can you kind of share some of your experiences with
So
that
I'd
writing
always
competition?
valued military journals. I was an armor officer, and as an armor officer, I always thought Armor Magazine used to be really, really good back
Yeah.
before
80s,
Watt.
90s,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I would go back and read the old articles
Yeah.
for that reason. The 80s, 90s, I'd
Yeah.
look at the archive, and I'd pull that up. Same thing with Military Review. Military Review used to be really, really good, and I would go back and read old Military Review articles. And so I always stayed up on top of Military Review. I'd been at Leavenworth. I'd published a couple articles in Military Review before that one.
Yeah.
And so when I was at Leavenworth, I'd always go get the hard copy because I always had it on
Yep.
post. And so I would monitor what was going on. I knew they had a writing competition, and that year I just happened to see the topic. And my topic, and I forget what it was. It was like what hot spots or
Mhm.
things is the Army ill-suited for? And I was like, oh, this is perfect because we don't even
Yeah.
use the word proxy. So like we need to talk about it. And so that's what spurred that. I was paying attention, the topic match, because every year I still look at the topics,
Sure.
and I'll be like this year's topic doesn't really fit anything that I would want to write about. So I'm like, maybe next year. But I always pay attention to the topic that they have for the writing competition. And that year just happened to fit. This year it was more, I want the money. And so I'm going to write a paper that I hope gets me the money. And it fit what I was interested in writing about anyway, because I've written a lot about Russia, Ukraine. My SAM's monograph was on the Russia, Ukraine conflict up to that point, because I completed SAM's in 2017. So
Yeah.
this was that early proxy war phase. I'd mentioned proxy war in my monograph some, but not a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, Mariah fights a proxy war every day with the JAG. I don't know if you guys know this, but they're like they're like the overshadow or deep state of the organization. No, I'm
purpose.
just kidding. Mariah,
Yeah.
what
we have to
competition
stay
are you
real
looking at? Are you
under
looking at
the-
any right now? I know you got some stuff you're baking in the oven. So
Yeah,
what's
not right
on what's
now.
on deck for you?
I'm just trying to get our work done, sir, with all this new stuff,
Are we frozen?
all the
Videos.
ice
the video is
developments and
frozen.
everything like that. So no competitions for me for right now.
Okay. All right. I think we'll come back. It looks like the video is frozen on her end too. So, it's not. What about I don't hear anyone talking.
I stopped talking
You
for a
hear her
moment,
talking?
sir.
I'm
Can
sorry,
you hear?
Mariah. I'm totally jacking this up for some reason. I'm not hearing anything. Yeah.
All right, the boss jumped off and he's jumping back on.
All right.
There he is.
All right. Okay, we can hear you now. Sorry, I'm such a popular person. People keep trying to call during this session, so I probably threw up on my volume. I'm sorry, Mariah.
It's okay,
I know
sir.
you were waxing eloquently. What do you have for us?
Always, yes. No, I was just saying, I'm just trying to get, our normal work stuff done right now and balancing that with civilian and life and everything. So no competitions in the near future for me, but I'm always interested in, getting published and things like that. Any lawyer is, so.
Yeah, right on. Okay, TJ. Amos. TJ's working on his PhD, so he's always in some type of competition,
Yeah.
right? Competing for time or competing for words. TJ, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean this weekend for me specifically, I'm really focused on chapter 2 of my dissertation. I should be about ready to get it in front of my chair. The intent's to get it in front of him Monday, and then we're going to discuss it later in the week before we go into the defending chapters 1 through 3.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm also critiquing. I had all 3 batteries from my battalion submit the Hamilton Award to me. So I've got all 3 of those in, and I'm reviewing them. And then from there, you'll get to review it as well, along with the CG expressed interest in reading about what all they did over this last year in Europe. So I'm not just trying. I'm trying to turn something in, but I'm also trying to make sure that the people that work for me have something good enough to turn in as well. So
Yeah. Yeah. Amos, you ever find yourself in a position where you're doing a lot of editing for a friend?
Yeah, so I'm yes, all the time. I'm in addition to being a professor at Arizona State, which requires editing and grading, I also am the managing editor for Small Wars Journal.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's
And
what-
so I spend a lot of time, I spend a decent amount of time editing other people's submissions. We have an editorial team, but
Mhm.
we've hit the point now because it's come back to life. Arizona State bought it and we relaunched it
Yeah.
in November, to where we were getting like 1 or 2 things a week. Now we get probably 10 things a day.
Oh wow.
And so I'm having to help out a lot more with the editing than what
Sure.
I'd like to be doing instead of just managing the journal.
So you guys need some guest editors.
We do need some help if anybody.
Yeah.
If anybody's looking to help be a volunteer editor with Small Wars.
Yeah, I remember Strategy Bridge, and Nate
Mhm.
Finney used to do that is recruit editors for the Strategy
Yep.
Bridge. Well, so that's so cool. So Small Wars, you guys bought Small Wars Journal.
Mhm.
So I mean, when we start talking, Army starts talking large scale combat operations, and we look at Small Wars journals.
Yeah.
Like, how do those two juxtapose in this kind of modern, scholarship?
So is the person that manages the inbox for Small Wars Journal and puts everything on the website.
Yeah.
I don't care about the Small Wars portion of Small Wars Journal.
Yeah.
And as a
sure.
former armor officer, a retired armor officer, I generally it's okay,
Yeah.
And so like I'm the one who puts the content on there every day, and so
Yeah.
the editor in chief is actually a retired SF officer, and every now and then he jokes with me, and he's like, "Well, we ought to be calling this Big Wars Journal or Any Wars Journal." And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Listen, like we're getting good discourse going,
Yeah.
regardless of what it's tied to." So there's a lot of
Yeah.
other journals out there that focus discreetly on irregular warfare and small wars related stuff. So we've broadened the aperture. The name's the same,
Yeah.
but we've broadened what we accept and what we talk about on the journal.
Well, even when you think about large scale combat operations, how quickly things move from defensive to offensive, vice versa, to stability to,
Mhm.
oh, by the way, we're also doing irregular warfare. There
Yeah.
is absolutely a component within there.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, folks. Try and bucket things.
Yeah.
And a lot of times within everything's going
Yeah,
on.
it's
There
all-
may be conventional elements within a small war or a regular war. There's always some sort of irregular warfare going on within a large scale combat operation. So that's why I also think it's important to have that overlay and that intermix, because
Yeah.
if IW practitioners, small wars folks are only looking at that one little thing, right?
Yeah.
They lose the context of the war they're in. And then they'll also, I was at, again, a conference in DC on irregular warfare last week. And that's one of the big things. I was like the token, like armor guy in the room, and it was all retired SF folks. And that's all they wanted to talk about. And they were like, well, it's the most popular form of warfare. I'm like, okay, cool. But like at the same time, it's either part of a bigger war, or it may be, interconnected somehow. So,
Yeah, sure.
yeah, we can't look at it distinctly by
No.
itself all the
Are
time.
you think you guys are doing any writing competitions for Small Wars Journal?
Not right now, but it's been talked about.
Yeah,
We've
that's
talked
good.
about it. Yeah,
Right on. So
we got to have capacity.
yeah.
We did do one for it wasn't a competition, but it was a futurist what's it, useful fiction type
Okay.
thing, and we
Yeah.
published a couple of
Yeah.
useful fiction articles back in I think January, and that was through a competition, but the competition was run by somebody else, and we posted the results for that. It was a company that does like doctrine for the special operations community.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, I'm gonna turn it loose to the writing roundtable. You guys have anything on your mind? I mean, I have a few more questions for Dr. Fox, but I absolutely don't want to consume his time here. This is the writing roundtable. All right, Jared, you leaned forward first. I saw that flinch.
I saw what you did there. I see what you did there. No, I think, it's, when you talk about like the revising and editing and things like that, right? Using AI, it makes it easy, right? Right, Colonel Hildebrand, right? We saw each other this week. And I'm like, oh, hey, look, I'm done with my article. It took me
Yeah.
all of about 5 minutes for me to
Oof.
give some prompts, some very specific things, and pump out
Yeah.
some stuff. I'm like, oh, I'm done. Wipe my hands clean of it, right? And then, right, we
Mhm.
were talking about it, and it goes back to, I was in the Navy. I was a nuclear mechanic on a submarine of the tech, right? And our motto was technology and tradition, which kind of goes into all of that, right? With this modern warfare, with some of the stuff, where is the tradition behind it? I think writing is a good example of that. With, right, we have computers, we have this, we have all this stuff that can do things for us. But writing in all reality is almost that basic level of critical thinking. You have to be able to have critical thinking to write an article, to write something that people are going to want to read and actually have an impact on things.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No,
It's
that's
just,
good. And to Jared's credit, as soon as he showed me that article, I was like, AI wrote this. I can tell just by looking at the construct of
Mhm.
the paragraphs and the words used. I was like, Jared, AI wrote this. He's like, it did, boss. It did, but it did it so fast. I was like, right on. But that's not the goal. The goal, like Jared and I go back and forth on this. So how do you, and maybe let's get your opinion on this,
Yeah.
Dr. Ross. So you have AI, it's a tool. You can cite AI in your paper. Like AI did this for me, and you can say, hey, you can cite that in your paper. But at what point does what you give AI, like what AI does for you, is it no longer your work? AI did it. And so we've been taught, this is a constant topic for us. We've been going back and forth, but I mean, I have my opinion. Jared has his, obviously, but I lean towards more of a conservationalist approach, like very traditional, like, hey, that's, I don't want to get anywhere near that line of plagiarism. So
Yep.
stay far away. Jared's like, where's the line at? I want to get as close as I can, and it's still mine.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I can answer that from two perspectives. So as a professor, I run everything that I get through something that looks for AI. And if it's more than like 10%, like I say 0
Yeah.
on the assignment, right? Because I don't care what a computer has to say about something.
Mm-hmm.
In an educational environment, I care about what the student has to say, what the student understands, how well the student can articulate the ideas that are, up for debate within the conversation. So, in that stand, I even tell them like, hey, don't use Grammarly at all. I don't care. I'm not critiquing you about how your grammar is, your words, all that.
Mm-hmm.
Critiquing the ideas and your ability to express your ideas. So there's that side. Then on my end, for me personally, it's a similar thing. Like I want my ideas to be my ideas. I don't
Mhm.
want a computer to interpret my ideas and put it on paper. It's not, for me, it's not about saving time. It's about getting the ideas as close to what I think as possible. And I have to spend the time crafting, manufacturing, chipping away at the
Mhm.
words and the sentences and the structure to get it to the point that it's mine. And so for me, I don't use any kind of IA at all to help with writing. I still do things, I hate the phrase old school, but I still do things old school.
Mhm.
I type something on a computer, I print it out, I read it, and I go through with a pen when I do my editing on it.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's got to sound the way that I want it to sound. It's got to read the way that I want it to read.
Yeah.
And AI can't catch the things that I'm looking for, even if I tell it how, just because I'm probably not that good with AI, to tell it how to make it read the way that I want it
Yeah.
to read for myself. And so I don't personally, I don't touch it at all. Now we have, like with Small Words Journal, we have a I don't use it on Small Wars Journal either. I sit and read everything myself that I edit. But we have a GPT that the editor in chief made that the people on the team can use if they want to put articles through, and it'll proofread them and get feedback. I don't know how many of the people use it. We also have on the team at Small Wars Journal, there's graduate students and undergraduates that are
Sure.
editors. They're actually not allowed to use it for all the reasons that we
Yeah,
just talked about.
Sure.
So
Yeah,
they're
that
not
makes
even
sense.
allowed to have access to it because the university provided us with whatever the most up-to-date Chat
Yeah.
GPT version is. But those folks aren't even allowed to touch it because the university's so afraid of them plagiarizing that.
Sure. It's dangerous. It's a dangerous
Yeah.
tool. Hey, Matt Cox, I know you're you're finished. Are you getting started with AOC, or did you finish ILE? Where are you at in that process? I know you're getting geared up to use some AI.
I'm 2 months away from graduation, sir, from AOC. So I'm
Yeah.
excited. But yeah, I did with what Dr. Fox just talked about, his experience with AI in the professional environment. I wanted to ask because that's now an accepted practice at ILE and AOC. AI has been incorporated into our student writing guides. They've given us proper examples of how to cite it. Obviously, there's probably a percentage threshold that they look for where, like you said, it's no longer our idea, but it's someone else's idea. How do you feel about that shift in military education?
I don't think it's great, to be frank. We're always looking for faster and easier ways to do things in the military, and I think sometimes that comes at a cost. And learning how to articulate things in writing is very hard. And any cheat to that, I think, takes away from your ability to articulate things in writing in a way that gets your idea across, but then also gets sharp, pointed, detailed ideas across.
Sure.
And so I don't think that's the best idea, but CGSC Leavenworth does what it wants. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think every institution is going to, have their own stance on that position. So, anyone else? Shots fired across the bow here to take a Navy term.
I'll comment.
All right.
I'll comment, sir. I don't feel like it's really a good tool for lawyers. I've used it before just to get like a jumping off point for research, reference, statutes or this or that don't exist. So I think it's a tool that wants to create something for you and like, here's the answer. But then I've gone and checked the actual reference and it cited a code that didn't exist at all. So I'm like, well, this isn't good for legal advice. So then I had to go back, but it's a good, for initial, like, what's the case law on this issue? And then I'll go double check it within like an Lexis or something, but I don't think it has access to everything it needs to give you the right answer.
that's something I've
sometimes.
seen, if I can jump in there. I've seen something similar. So I also work as a lecturer at the University of Houston in the political science department. And between those two jobs, Arizona State and Houston, I've seen very similar situations where I'll go check a reference because the reference will just look funny, and I'll be like, I've never heard of this thing.
Mhm.
And then I'll go check it and it doesn't exist, and that
Yeah.
was one of the things where I had to come back and be like, put the hammer down with the students. I'm like, you got to actually do the work,
Yeah.
and you can't just put the thing in and ask it the question and it give you an answer. And then you take that answer and put it in your paper and consider it done. Like,
Mhm.
cause I'll, like for research, I'll put stuff in ChatGPT and I'll be like, hey, tell me this,
Yeah, right.
And the problem I found doing my own research is it gives you odd feedback too. It'll give you like a few, like if you ask for a journal article on a certain thing,
Yeah.
it'll only give you a couple of journal articles that are like really weird and obscure, like this Indian journal on international affairs, right? Indian, like the country of India,
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know that I'm going to use that for
Right.
what I'm working on. And so that's one of the cautions that goes into that. And you would think that that's implied, right? Like, oh, as me doing the searching, I need to go verify everything that it's saying and look at the credibility at the source that it's giving me. But we also know that that doesn't always happen, and so
No, yeah.
I've run into the same issue with students and myself doing my own research on stuff. And I'm like, nope, can't put that in. You got to keep digging.
Yeah, the funny, like the industry standard for AI is like they have this human in the loop involvement,
Mhm.
right? And I mean, you kind of have to flip the script on that if you're writing something, and you have to be like, it can be AI in the loop, but it's got to be the human.
Yeah, the human.
AI can do some stuff for you. Jared and I joke about this because I told him one of my biggest, I look at AI and I say, hey, I will take some of the articles that I've written for like military review, and I'm like,
Mhm.
summarize that for me, AI, ChatGPT, and they summarize it. I'm like, that's not right at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, okay, so that means either one or two things. I did a bad job structuring my article because ChatGPT couldn't understand me.
Which is
or-
never the case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's right. It's never the case. You guys remember that. So, or like ChatGPT is wrong,
Yeah.
which is,
Yeah.
is probably the case. So, that's cool. Well, we definitely went down a rabbit hole there. But that's okay. That's what this is
Yeah.
for. So, because look, our audience has these same questions we do, right?
Yeah.
They like same question Jared has. It's always a balance of like, I got, and we were talking about this before. The Army wants you to put 5 pounds of stuff in a or 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag,
Yeah.
right? And so you're always running out of time. And so absolutely that's a time saver. I'm sure if you're doing operations orders, you're doing, your logistic annex, your personal annexes, and you're like, hey, ChatGPT, help me out. You could probably accept some,
Yeah.
hey, 80% of government work is good enough, right?
Yeah.
So you could probably accept some stuff there. But when it comes to, hey, this is my idea, this is what I think,
Yep.
you kind of don't want to have AI in the loop.
Yeah, you have to wholly own it.
Yeah.
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 Hey, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, so I'm not Soren Kraus. I don't use AI. I told myself that I wouldn't use it until I at least finished my dissertation.
Mhm.
And then a couple months ago, I got an original copy of my grandfather-in-law's dissertation that he did in the 70s. So it reminded me of like the Dewey Decimal System, and he had to use a typewriter, and you had to find all of the stuff. You couldn't Google it and just
Yeah.
you couldn't use an online library. And then how far AI has become. But I say all that to say I think we should build in the parameters of, for the 36th Infantry Division writing competition, what are the AI parameters that we will or will not accept, right?
We definitely should. Yeah, that's a good point. And you mentioned the Dewey Decimal System. I was always a fan of old school research because I would go looking for one book, and what do I find on
Yeah.
the shelf right next to it?
Yeah.
A book probably I wouldn't have thought to look up,
Yep.
but because it's in the same content. Are you guys tracking? Can you hear me?
We're good.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, so I would find a book on the shelf right next to it, something very similar to,
Yeah.
it works. So it was a happy find. And I think,
When I was at Leavenworth, that's, when I was CGSC and SAMS, it was the same thing. I'd go over to the library at Leavenworth. I'd go in to get one book, and then I'd be like, I'm just gonna walk around for a minute, and then I'd leave with like an arm of
Mhm.
books, and I'm like, I'm already supposed to be reading an arm of books, and now I've got another arm of books. So
Yeah.
I'm right there with you.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, hey, you were able to compete for 2 different writing competitions, Dupuy, like 2018, 2024. You kind of talked about your 2018 experience a little. Did you learn anything from that 2018 experience that you applied to your 2024 experience, where you're like, hey, you know what? This is something that can help me win this competition.
So yes, but it didn't help me win. So part of it is I always try, and I tell this to anybody that's writing, if you're writing for a prompt of any kind, answer the question, right?
Hmm.
And so read the question, make sure you understand the question, and then answer the question. Now the question may be broad,
Sure.
right? But make sure that you're answering that question. And so that's the first thing. Each time I go back and look at it, I'm like, I've got these ideas. Do any of my ideas fit with that question? Can I answer that question with some of the things that I'm thinking about? And if the answer is yes, then I'll be like, okay, I'll start working on it that way. And then the other part, and this is something that I think folks forget too, and again, I see this with my students, and I beat them up about it all the time, but then also working for Small Wars Journal, like you have to make the person you're submitting it to happy,
Mm-hmm.
right? So do things the way that they've told you to do it.
Yeah.
So with military review, you actually have to submit the article in a very, talk about old fashioned way. With footnotes or endnotes, I forget, I think it's
It's
endnotes,
in those, yeah.
but not with the built-in feature
right.
where you can go insert endnote. You have to physically put in the superscript letter, highlight it, and then build the list at the end of the article.
Yeah.
And so, like that, you can submit the article without doing that and be like, screw it, I'll just see what happens when they
Yeah.
respond.
Yeah.
Or you can make sure that you've done that work on the front end and just follow the instructions that you're provided. It's like Small Works Journal. If something comes in and it's not formatted the way that we want, I'm like, I'm not gonna read it.
Yeah.
Send it back, do what we ask. It's all there on the website.
Yeah.
And so that really is like the first step for me, trying to win
Yeah.
competitions. I've not cracked the code yet, but I'm gonna keep trying because I will take $1,000 for,
Yeah.
an article. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's almost like screening criteria and evaluation criteria,
Yeah.
right? You can't even get your foot in the door if you're not following the directions.
Yep.
Like Mariah, you get a lot of those 15.6s that come your way,
uh,
right? And you're like, hey, did you follow the guide?
Just
Writer, did you in IO? Did you follow the guide? Yes or no? I didn't. Okay, well,
here
here you go. Right? You see stuff like that?
mhm. Every time. And it kind of goes back to that answer the question, like that Dr. Amos said. Whenever we say, hey, we want you to answer these questions, and then the scope of the investigation is all jacked up, and then, it's just stressful. But it happens every single time. So maybe I'm doing a bad job telling them what I expect. I don't know. But yes, definitely answer the
Yeah,
question,
that's what
people.
I think is the most important part of writing, whether it's your own question, right? So if you do research, whether you're working on a PhD or writing an article for something, you should always have a question you're trying to answer, right? You may already have a hypothesis
Mhm.
when you start, but you should frame a question for that and then put that up there so the reader understands this is the question I'm trying to answer, but then also understand the consumer, right? And the consumer is always, whether it's your PhD advisor or the person on the other end of 15.6 or the other person on the end of an article that you've submitted or your professor that you're submitting a paper to, like if they've told you how to write something,
Mhm.
that's because that's how they digest information, or that's how they want to receive the information. And so you always have to follow those instructions, and they're always posted. Like I don't know any lawyer that hasn't said this is the format that you
Yeah.
need to submit this in, or the same thing with flipples, right?
Yeah.
The flipple format is this,
Right.
if they're still called flipples.
Oh, they are. Yeah.
Do it in this format, and understand and appreciate who the consumer is, whether that's an editor or somebody in a specific staff section or whatever the case may be. Because if you don't give it to them in the way that they've asked,
Yeah.
you're already stepping off on the wrong foot.
Yeah, absolutely. Our first session, we had the Commanding General Jerome Bullen, whose program, this is his program, and we talked about that, like writing for your audience.
Mhm.
Like you have to know your audience. If your audience is a general officer, you got to know something about them.
Yep.
Time is precious.
Yeah.
I mean, time is precious for us all, but
Right.
but reality is you have to get to the point for them. They don't want excessive verbiage. They don't
Yep.
need wordy papers. They don't need wordy slides. And so I think that's a very good point to drive home to everyone in the audience. Know the question that
Yep.
you want to answer, know your audience and how they like to receive that answer. And then those are the first two conditions that you have to achieve before you can even get your ideas
Yep.
or convince them to read.
Right.
Right. So excellent. I have a couple more questions, folks, but like I said, I'm doing due diligence here. Matt, am I checking the box for you? You scratching that itch? You were a big part of getting Dr. Amos here. So what else do you want to ask Dr. Amos?
I'm
sorry,
in
Dr.
competition with time, sir. So
That's all good.
Yeah, writing competition. Yeah, good. Anyone else? They might be frozen. All right.
No,
we're good.
I'll come up on the net. So when it comes to the writing competition, is there any chance we could have a guest editor to kind of help us with some of those?
I'm happy to help edit anything. So if you
Yeah.
guys have my contact, you can
Absolutely.
share it, and
Yeah.
I'm happy to help anybody out with any of that.
Just remember the rule of reciprocity, TJ. So You
That's
know,
right.
yeah, he helps guest editing for us. You may find yourself as a guest editor for the Small Wars Journal.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so
I've,
You'd be on a
I've
6-month
had,
pitch.
yeah,
that's not a bad gig.
yeah, no, it's good. It's reps and sets. I mean, we one of the sessions we talked about modeling writing after what you read,
Yeah.
right? And so, absolutely, there's things out there that people who do it right, and you'll see it. I'm sure as an editor, you've seen, you're like, wow, this guy really nailed
Yeah.
the cohesiveness of this article. So,
And that's one of the things too, when I talk to especially students, but a lot of times the Small Wars Journal, the ideas will be there, but the way that it reads is not coherent necessarily, or it's just hard to follow, right? And so again, going back to knowing your audience, one of the things I always tell people is use sections and section headings. It's a roadmap,
Mhm.
right? And it's like an op order, like you know where you're working, where you're at within the order based off what paragraph you're in. And so when you write something, again, like for the writing competition in particular, right, you want the reader and the grader and the people that determine yay or nay, like to clearly understand where they're at within your argument. And it's the same thing with just any writing in general. And so like, I'll get papers for class where, you know, and I've gotten to the point now where I explicitly list, like, put these things in your paper. And
Yeah.
the rubric, the first thing I look at is, did you follow the instructions?
yeah,
And the 10 points you get are based on the 10 points that I put in the instructions.
sure.
You know, and so like sections and headings, it's one of the things I'm trying to educate the students on is that, like, it's a roadmap that helps not only you as the writer keep your ideas flowing logically, but the person on the end of what you've written, keeping them anchored in your argument and understanding where you're going with that argument. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's good. Hey, so I'm gonna take a different direction here
Mhm.
for a sec. So on some of your work, I've noticed that you've challenged maybe the status quo of thinking,
Mhm.
right? And you know, some of our writers out there, they may have an idea where it goes against the grain of conventionality. Like,
Yeah.
you know what? It's not just outside the box thinking. Like, if I put this on paper, I'm going to challenge. Maybe I'm challenging a doctrinal concept that's been out there for a minute.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen that in some of your work. Can you comment a little bit about that and like some of the challenges or maybe some of the struggles or realities that you have to deal with when you're challenging
Yeah.
conventional thought?
So the first thing on that is you have to have like an informed opinion, right? And an informed assessment, if
Right.
you will, on what is wrong with the status quo and be able to defend your position. You can't just come out and be like, oh, this is stupid, right? I mean, you can do that, but you're
Yeah,
going to
yeah,
quickly
yeah,
like
yeah.
lose any kind of credibility. So
Yeah.
you have to have concrete evidence to support your position. The other part is you have to have a backbone because inevitably you're going to face backlash, whether it's from people or institutions or a mix of, you know, various different things. And so you have to understand that going in and then just be prepared for the ramifications. 2018, I was Battalion S3, me and two buddies published an article in Modern War Institute called "The Army's Wrong About Future War." And I come into work the day that it comes out, and it was on a Friday, and we had like a brigade thing. I forget what it was. And the brigade commander immediately comes up to me and basically roughs me up verbally because we called out a lot of the things that we felt the Army was wrong about. And as it was thinking about the future, ironically, we were pretty close on a lot of them. If you
Yeah.
go back and look at the article versus today,
Sure.
and so that's one of the things you have to be prepared for, and it can cost you too, because you know this Army business is a game of personalities, and that can create. Some people can see you potentially as not being on the team or being disloyal or whatever phrase it is you want to use. And I would argue by critiquing the system, you're offering the highest degree of loyalty possible
Sure.
by saying, "Hey, institution, we have a problem and I'm here to help," right?
Right. There's a hole in my swing.
Right. And a lot of people will see that the other way. They'll be like, this guy's against, you know, what it is we're doing. And so that's something I felt and saw a lot when I was writing a lot of things over the years was people would view it in a negative way as opposed to like, no, I'm trying to help make the team better.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
And so there's that. The other part is just, again, you know, like I've written a lot about maneuver and the various forms of warfare. And, you have to go back and dig in and talking about digging into sources. You got to dig into sources, right? Look at the sources that people use to build, in this case, maneuver doctrine, right? And the maneuverist way of thinking that's out there today. And if you go back and look at the sources, a lot of the sources are bad, right? And you have to be able to lay that out. Look, I did my research. Here's the literature review. These are the things I've looked at. This is where these things are wrong. These things are right. And this is why I'm making the argument. So like I mentioned, I think before we got going here, I submitted a book to the publisher on the 31st that I have coming out. It's called Maneuvers Dead, right? And so it's a whole book on this topic. And the whole book digs into various other things as it relates to warfare, land warfare, because the subtitle is like Understanding Land Warfare in the 21st Century.
Right.
And it talks about different approaches that you will inevitably face regardless of how you want to fight.
Right.
And one of the things in the chapter specifically on maneuver is like a detailed, here's all the people that we always talk about and all the books that we always talk about when we talk about maneuver warfare thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And here's why 95% of those are wrong, right?
Wow.
And so, but you have to be able to go do research, dig into things, follow the trail of research, right? So this, this one thing or doctrine says this person said this. Let me go look at what they wrote. Their sources are this. Let me go look at their sources, and you have to basically process trace the sources as far back to like, where does the idea start?
Yeah.
And then say, okay, now what's the validity of each one of those sources?
Yeah.
And then you can come back and be like, this is why I say, the backstory on this topic is wrong. Now here's what the story should be. And so that's one of the big things that I think it's time consuming, it's hard, it's fun.
Yeah.
I think that's the fun part.
Yeah. The interplay.
I'll sit there and look over and I'll have like 15 books stacked up there next to me. And I'm like, where the hell am I at in all this? I forget what I'm even doing,
Yeah.
So.
And when you look, like reading some of those old armor journals from 80s and 90s and military review, you used to see the interplay between those writers that would actually battle each other in words, right? And you kind of have that fun interplay.
That's the other thing too. You don't see that anymore.
No, you don't.
There's like some sort of fake etiquette that's developed where you don't critique stuff other people have said because we're all trying to be good teammates. When I would argue that's the ultimate way of being a good teammate is challenging an idea somebody says like, well, I disagree with you and here's why.
Yeah.
And you do that politely. You don't have to be a jerk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So recently, I guess about 2 years ago, I say recent, it's 2 years. In terms of me writing, it's recent. I wrote, there was a Lithuanian author, I can't remember his name. I think I have it written down here. Yeah. Major Gintatas Razma, right? From Lithuania.
You said it way better than I would have.
Yeah, I practice phonetics when I can, I guess.
Yeah.
So he wrote this new concept. He was challenged. He said, hey, you know what? METTC is out. I got this new concept called MTGLEO, right? So he called it Mission Time Geospace Local Economy Forces, Own Forces. And so he came up with this new concept to go against the METTC.
Yeah.
And so he had a very scientific, scripted perspective on his framework.
Yeah.
I wrote a counter argument to his article. So I wrote an article in the military review and said, hey, interesting concept, has its place. A scientific approach to things absolutely have their place. But I kind of took like a historical perspective and I say, hey, look, you can't just throw the historical perspective out.
Yeah.
Right? Look at how General Dupuy, look at Don Starry, look at how these guys developed this concept of METTC over time. And then look at how they valued looking at the ground up perspective, not just scientifically, but like, hey, what's the combat analysis of this particular piece of land?
Yeah.
Right. And so I argued back like, hey, what you did was good, but you can't do it at the exclusion of the other.
Yeah.
And so that was my point. I was like, oh man, I'm going to get in this. I thought to myself, I'm going to get into the war of words with this guy.
Yeah.
It's going to span over the journal. So I got nothing back.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's okay.
That's that's part of, I think that should be what journals look to foster also.
Sure.
Is that debate of ideas, because really, like, where else does that happen with people from across in today's age across the globe, really?
Yeah.
Where you can have this debate, intellectual debate with no cost, right? The
Yeah.
only cost is your time, and it doesn't, like, you're not investing money and resources, right? Like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Let's go ahead and start funding
Yeah.
it, It's just the ideas. And then if that influences decision makers,
Yeah.
great, and if it doesn't,
Yeah.
great too,
So Mariah and I were talking, I think last month, Mariah, like we were talking different JAG reports. So a lot of times we get legal reviews on things. And it's not necessarily like footballs or whatnot, but like, hey, we need a legal review on a topic. And I think Mariah offered up, she's like, we probably should do some type of like minority report. Mariah, remember that conversation we had about that?
Yes, sir. I think it was your idea, but I thought it was a great
I
idea.
think it was yours, but anyways, why don't you expound on that for the
Okay.
group? Like, what are your thoughts behind that? Like, as an organization, how do we typically do legal reviews, and then like, what are you thinking about like a minority report or dissenting opinion?
Yes. So first off, just as an aside comment, I was taking notes down so I can tell my husband that argument that Dr. Amos said, like, I'm doing this for your own good to tell you you're doing this wrong. So I took that down, so I'm keeping that in my
wife
back
does not
pocket for
appreciate
later.
it when I tell-
But all right. But no, the minority report that we discussed, it was like we do legal reviews and we look at the current standards and how we do things, and we say, yes, this is legal, no, this is not, here's why. But instead of doing that, and after that step, it's, hey, maybe, when we looked at these things, we weren't looking at this other process or what really is wrong. Once we say this isn't legal, well, why? Why is it? What's wrong with the process? How can we improve it? That kind of thing. Maybe we should be documenting that in addition to this legal review. Because once the legal review is done, we don't have any documentation to help us improve or go forward. Like, it's almost like an AAR of the whole process as a whole. And I mean, we do that in the Army, we do that in the Air Force, but in the legal world, we tend to stop at that legal review. And maybe if we went a step further, we could actually utilize those documents and resources as well.
Yeah. TJ, do you find yourself getting into a lot of arguments with your sponsor for your PhD?
No, we don't argue. I mean, he gives me constructive feedback. He's a retired major general, but he's been pretty supportive on everything. He may say like, well, I just ask that you think about this, right? Which is kind of like the equivalent of a foot stomp for those of us in the military, right? Like, you might want to relook that. But for the most part, I mean, any of the things I've ran into were like during the coursework, when we had to do collaborative work, specifically in the conflict resolution classes. Like, then we would run into some ideas that didn't come together, and that's where you do have the friendly discourse and just have like, here's what the data says, the information. This is why I approached it from this angle, right? Because if you just go based off of what you have to have more information to back it up, because everyone has a different life experience that they've lived through, and if you only look through the lens of yours and not pull in all the information, then you do find yourself at a disadvantage. And like, I guess one of the weeks before, we had talked about the best way to defend your position is being able to understand the opposing position to what you're trying to write about.
Sure. Yeah.
I'll jump in on that.
Yeah, do it.
So this is a great point too. So when I was finishing my PhD and I was at the tail end of everything, my PhD advisor is he's like the leading proxy war scholar. And so those are always fun because it was always pedantic and him talking down to me and this and that, right? But we hit a point where I told him, and so I went to the University of Reading, which is in the UK, in Reading, England. And my advisor is actually he's Romanian, but he's a UK citizen now. So his name's Vlad, or Vlad.
Nice.
From Indiana, so the A's always come out very nasally. So I was like, hey, Vlad, check it out. Your idea is stale and your argument's quite tired and boring at this point. And here's, you need to inject some technology over the top of this. And that's what I was looking at, and I'm still right. I've got an article right now that I'm working on that talks about how technology is changing proxy war strategy, right?
Yeah.
He didn't talk to me for about 3 months, right? Which is challenging when you're trying to finish everything and get your defense
Yeah.
on the schedule. So I had to go back and be like, I'm sorry, I apologize. So I say all that to say, don't ever tell your advisor that their work is stale and boring and worn out.
Yeah.
Because it'll probably not work out well for you.
Yeah. So Jared, take heed, buddy. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, so Jared and I, he's like my sounding board. So like we do a war of words a lot. Like he'll push me to think about different opinions and then like a lot of times I just throw out I'm like, hey, you're an enlisted person. What do you think about this idea?
Yeah.
So he gives me that perspective. Jared, any comment on that?
It's stale and boring. Stale and boring. I like that. I'm gonna steal that. No,
Hey, I picked those
it's
words
really
on
good when
purpose
you
for this
have those
one.
people that, you have that safe place where you can challenge each other, knowing that at the end of the day, you're not gonna be mad, you're not gonna this. It's like
Yeah.
there's been some times like right, we've hung up and I'm like, I wonder if he's mad at me. And then right the next day I get a phone call and he's like, right, we're on to the next thing. I was like, okay, good. Good. I didn't overstep too far. But no,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
right, when we start challenging these thoughts and ideas, exactly. That's, I mean, with your work, Dr. Fox, it's some of that same stuff, right? It's challenging some of these status quos of, no, historically, this is the way that it's done. But I mean, historically, we used to stand in front of each other and shoot rifles. Right. And I guess whoever
Right.
had the more
Yeah.
troops won.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
that ever evolving, everything that goes into that. That's what we have to do. And I think that's
Yeah.
where some of the most, some of the best working groups come up with those forefront products or that, right? People that are challenging that status quo of that.
Yeah.
No, your ideas are kind of stale on that one, right? Let's start integrating drones. Let's worry
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
satellites and this and all these other things that really is that modern warfare and that for future warfare that what you're talking about, right? The small wars journal, if you really think about it, I think eventually that's what most wars will end up being are small wars. Large wars are right, they're unsustainable. And look at all the confusion that it causes.
Yeah.
My take on
And
it. I don't know.
just the modern day appetite for attrition. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like people lose their minds. If we had the casualties of World War II in today's wars with America, like there would be an uprising. Unacceptable, probably.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So, hey, we got a couple more minutes left, but I did want to ask you. So, one of the kind of pending questions out there is like, how, like, the Chief of Staff of the Army tells us writing is important because it helps fill the gap that doctrine can't keep. Doctrine can't keep up with the reality of warfare right now, and so we're using writing to fill that gap. But that's one of the things he talks about. Have you seen, or how have you seen some of your work? Maybe it'd be great if you say, hey, that changed some doctrine. But I'm looking also just like, have you seen like a paradigm shift where you saw the doctrine was going in one direction, and because of some of your work, you're seeing it like, you know what, actually, we might want to do a veer off to the left.
So for my own personal experience, that article, the Military Review article on proxy war.
Yeah.
After that came out, I had gotten an email from whomever at the Joint Staff J33 doctrine update people. And they said, hey, we're updating whatever it is, JP something, special operations.
Sure.
Or JP, it was the 3.0, it was the operations manual. And they wanted to add a section on proxy war. And so they asked me to write that section on proxy war for JP 3.0. And I was the XO for 3rd Squadron, 4th SFAB at Fort Carson at the time. And so, during my free time, I wrote that chapter. When JP 3.0 came out of that chapter, it got reduced down to about a paragraph.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and there was just a small snippet of what I had written in there. And so like for me, I saw that happen based purely off something that I had written. And it's a small bit. And if you still go in there, it's still in there unless it's updated. I've quit paying attention to joint doctrine for the most part at this point in my life. The beard hasn't given that away. But, so there's that. And every now and then you'll see something that comes along that does give a little nudge for things to go in a different direction. You mentioned John Spencer earlier. His work has helped the Army shift its focus more to appreciating urban warfare and things like subterranean warfare. And so there's been incremental shifts in doctrine as a result of that work, not holistic, huge shifts necessarily.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that are at stake when it comes to doctrine too. Doctrine is not just ideas. It's, doctrine is a part of doctrinal PFP. And so you can't change doctrine without having a ripple effect across that. And so that's part of the problem. Like when I first started writing, I used to be like, we got to change this. But changing that changes all sorts of things, right?
Yeah, sure.
Or if you're like, hey, the force structure's wrong. These formations need to look like this. Well, that's not an easy thing to fix,
Yeah.
You can write a paper about it and it's real easy to say it, but the ability of the Army to actually change it is very challenging. So I think that's the one caution, is that you may be 100% right, whether it's doctrine, an organizational change that needs to occur, something, we just need to do differently. But the likelihood of that actually having an immediate impact
Yeah.
is fairly small.
Right.
It may have an impact 10 years down the road. It may have an impact, like if you're writing stuff today, the captains and majors of today may be the generals of tomorrow that are actually the ones that are implementing the ideas. So you also have to have like strategic patience,
We hope they are the ones, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that's excellent. Ironically, doctrine has the biggest impact on the rest of .mil.pf, but it's also probably the most affordable thing to do if you're looking to make a change.
Yeah.
Because your officers are giving ideas away for free.
Yeah.
Unless they win the competition for it.
That's right. And then
And
you
you-
pay them $1,000.
Then you
It's
get
a drop in the
$1,000.
bucket.
That's right.
Yeah.
$1,000. All right. Well, hey,
Hey, sir, so
yeah, go ahead.
I didn't want the opportunity with Dr. Fox to go back to his book, Conflict Realism.
Yep.
One of your chapters is focused on hard power versus soft power. So with the audience, the military audience that we have on, can you expand on that a little more, and what you think the rebalance or balance should be within the military for using hard power versus soft power as we start to look for and develop TTPs for LISCO?
Yeah, it's the big picture. I think that going back to historical precedent, right? So unfortunately, wars are won through attrition and exhaustion, and that's not necessarily palatable with anybody, but that's how wars are won. And wars continue to be fought in that manner today, not because the Russians are stupid or because their society supports that necessarily. It's because at the end of the day, like if you and I were to get into a slugging match, it doesn't matter how like polite we want to be about it, right?
Sure.
Or how unforceful we want to be about it. It's going to be about me or you making the other tap out, right?
Right.
And so it requires hard power to do that. And
The will to fight.
that's right. And at the end of the day, you never know the other person's intentions or capabilities fully, right? You may think you understand their intentions. You may think you understand their capabilities, but you have to be robust enough to fight through the fact that you don't know that, right? And so that requires, in my assessment, a larger force structure than what you have. Easier said than done, like we just said, like where's the money come from? I don't know. That's not my problem anymore,
Yeah.
And I'm just the idea guy. And so that's one of the key things. And again, going back to this, using Russia and Ukraine as an example, just since we're on the topic here, the war didn't turn attritional because either side was bad at warfare. It turned attritional because they closed the distance between one another.
Yeah.
And when the distance is closed between one another, you can't do cool things like maneuver warfare, right? You're physically
Yeah.
right there with each other. And then it gets even more challenging when, Russia had made, these dense minefields that the Ukrainians couldn't penetrate. You can't do maneuver if you don't have a flank, right? You can't do maneuver if there's not space between you to move, because move is a critical part of this, and move at angles, not straight ahead. And so the war fighting there became positional and attritional, right? And so at the end of the day, as an expeditionary army, like the U.S. Army is, we always go from here, the U.S. somewhere, to fight, right? And so we have to understand that the distance between us and an opponent is going to quickly close.
Yeah.
Especially if the opponent is the objective.
That's right.
Destruction of that army is what we're trying to do, or getting them to surrender, whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, you have to close a distance with them to do that. The other thing is if the goal is territorial, right? And the bad guys holding the territory, like you see in Ukraine, Russia's sitting in Ukrainian territory, you have to physically go in and remove those forces, because at the end of the day, and I love the artillery world, artillery only does so much. You can go in and hunker down and hide things out, right? You go underground, you go in buildings, you do all these things. And so while an initial strike from far away may have initial success, everybody's going to do what humans do when they're attacked. They're going to go hide,
Yeah.
right? And so by virtue of them hiding, you then have to incrementally move forward. Keep doing the I'm going to hit you when you come out game, but you're still going to have to go forward and remove them from the terrain. And so this is why I think I think wars are going to become even more attritional, and more drones dropping bomblets doesn't solve the problem of dudes hiding underground or hiding in buildings.
Yeah.
It can solve minute problems, but big, it's not something we've at least yet figured out how to scale sufficiently to negate the need for land forces. And so that's the short version of the answer to your question, Matt.
No, that's perfect, sir. And risk matrices, we've talked about it before in these series, but the risk matrices are going to change for commanders in LISCO because attrition is going to happen. Acceptable losses, are zero now, but in LISCO, it's going to change significantly. So yeah, thank you, sir, very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing too, to your comment earlier about tolerance, societal tolerance, I think that also, how much of the national interest is it, in the offing, right? And
Yeah,
if
sure.
it's something that's significant to the national interest, again, that's a very vague term, I know, but sometimes at the end of the day, you're told, hey, I don't care that you don't want to go fight. You're going to go fight.
Yeah, sure.
And, we have to do things to mobilize society. And what's the trigger for that? I don't know, but I do think there is a trigger for that.
Sure.
Are we going to get there in the next 50 years? I probably not, I would assume, just based off, I wouldn't even say the last 50 years, because we did have a draft in the last 50 years. But that's just something to consider. I think we can't necessarily dismiss that idea, because right now in the world that we live in, we don't necessarily think that that's going to be the case. There could be things where it's like, it just, China, for whatever reason.
Yeah, competition for resources.
Right. China does something somewhere, and holy cow, they've got a lot of people and a ton of stuff that they can shoot at us. We need to throw a ton of people at this problem. Well, guess what, everybody? It's time to grab a rifle or get on the gun. You're going to start shooting artillery. So I personally, this is the whole point, like, of the book, is I don't rule that out. I think it's that's why it's called realism, conflict realism.
Yeah.
I take what I think is a realistic, not an idealistic look at war and warfare in the future. And we have to be prepared for the reality that we may probably run into down the road.
Yeah, well, that's good. Hey, good question, Matt. I'm going to wrap things up here, folks. We got about 3 minutes. Just want to remind everyone out there, the writing competition is ongoing. If you need help, the links are in the website, or I should say the PowerPoint. You can click on those links. You can hit up me, Major Cox, some First Class Kraus, Mariah, any of us on this writing roundtable, and we'll answer your questions. Help you get started where you need to get started. So appreciate your time today. As always, we'll see you next time. What does Chief Weissy say? Same guard channel, same guard time.
Same guard time, same guard channel.
Yeah, you got it. All right. Thank you, everyone.